Hey folks, BlackCross here, and welcome to another video game review. Yes, it's finally time to review Biomutant. And there's a lot that I want to go ahead and talk about, but the biggest thing I wanted to talk about is the fact that, Biomutant has been under development for a long time. For many people, it's actually been longer than I think 4 years. And technically, it was 4 years ago that I first found out about Biomutant, which is strange to believe that it's been that long. It's hard to believe it. The wait had finally been over with. It's probably one of the longest wait next to that of Kingdom Hearts, or even for that matter, Final Fantasy 15. And because of the wait that I've had to do, I basically was looking forward to playing it, but I also kept my expectations relatively low. I tried to keep them as low as possible because I enjoyed how this game looked. The game itself looked amazing, and I thought to myself, this is going to be so amazing, but I had to lower it down just enough because I knew somewhere was not going to be as epic as I would have liked to have, and I'm glad I kept them low because I'm not saying that Biomutant's bad. In fact, it's not. It's still a really good game. But when you think of games that you've been hyped for, the hype level tends to go higher and higher as you wait longer and longer. And the longer that hype sets, the more anticipation grows, and that anticipation tends to kind of overgrow for a number of gamers and stuff. So in my personal opinion, I feel like when you have hype, you need to kind of settle them down to some degree and try to keep them low. That way you can still enjoy them, because as one wise man once said, the anticipation is the best part rather the actual experience itself. So it's one of those things where it's like expectations were high and the anticipation was growing rapidly, so I had to try to lower them down to some degree to where I could still enjoy Biomutant. And I still got to enjoy Biomutant very, very well, in fact. More so than I care to admit. But there's a few things that I do want to go ahead and stress out whenever I say this. Regardless of what I say in this video, if you are excited for Biomutant or you were very much interested in Biomutant in any form of way, I recommend you grab it. Biomutant is definitely a fun, entertaining game and a wonderful experience in my personal opinion. And when it comes to open world games, this would be part of the top 5 tier list that I would put together. Obviously, with the thanks of like The Witcher 3 and Breath of the Wild, they took the bar of what essentially was a concrete of open world games and have raised them, like literally raised them to a point where it's hard to kind of match that same level. One game that came close to matching that level to me was, of course, Ghost of Tsushima. What was its filmography that it was able to construct within the game. And it does really well in my personal opinion. But Biomutant, is it as good as those 3 games? Close, but not really. The best way to explain Biomutant is to explain it in a different way, and this may sound insulting to some people, but think of Biomutant as Fallout. And this may sound like a very, very insultive opinion, but it's literally not that far from the truth. It's literally Fallout, except in furry form. Now that sounds really bad, but just hang tight and I'll explain. So, the biggest thing when it comes to Biomutant is the fact that you can customize your character. You can customize how he looks, how his fur texture is, the color schemes, followed by his overall mass and appearance, If he's going to be a strong-built creature, he's going to be more muscular. If he's more agile and agility, he's going to be taller but lanky. If he's going to be smarter, he's going to be shorter but big-headed. So, all of this detailing in terms of the customization is very spot on, and it was for this reason alone that I got invested with Biomutant, because I saw that and I was like, the fact that it's like a multi-tier of like custom creation where it affects your overall stats, that makes this game so unique. Because when it comes to customization, there's really no like default method of customization. There's no like, oh, the bigger your character is, the slower he's gonna be. the smaller your character is going to be, the less likely he's going to achieve certain heist density and stuff like that. You know, those type of factors don't accumulate in terms of the long run overall gameplay experience. They're just, at the end of the day, cosmetic appearance. With Biomutant, they decided to take it into another level and just add it to where, based on the overall appearance of the character, depends on the overall stats he starts off with. So it's very interesting to actually kind of see that kind of play out, and you can actually randomize it and select based on the characteristic you want more of. So say you want your character to be more charismatic, you can have an ultimate overall look to that appeal. You can have how his strength is going to be built. Overall, it's built very well made in my personal opinion. And it's interesting too, and I'm going to go back into this over and over and over again, but Angry Joe did an interview with the director, and what's interesting is that the director talked about the character customization. And he said during the development of the character customizations, they had fun just creating it and trying to see how far they can go with the creation of the character. And basically there was a whole bunch of stuff that they've done random. As anyone of the Souls community can tell you, they probably have done some of the most craziest customizations that you can think of, and they probably had a blast and was like laughing out loud and stuff. So it makes perfect sense. But to see that character creation being a big part of the development was very interesting in my personal opinion. But next to that, when you start off the game, not only do you have the fact that your overall character customization and the stats and stuff, you also have jobs that you can learn. These different jobs give you different perks that will help you throughout the game. And I thought that this was interesting because whenever I did the unboxing and I got the Mercenary class with the collector's edition and stuff, I was kind of curious as to like, okay, how does this class thing work? Because I didn't know about it at the time. And it wasn't until I saw, whenever I got done with my customization, that the job classes were there, and I was like, oh, okay. And as far as it looks like you don't acquire a second job perk. Then again, there's so many other abilities that you still have to attain within the game that really having a second perk would kind of like deviate from like the other perks that you wouldn't be able to grab. Because while in the main scope of things you do level up in the game, you don't level up as fast like you would think. Like there's a trophy requirement that states to get to level 25, but in actuality I don't know what the max is right now, but I'm already at level like 33 and I've beaten the game already. So whenever I tell you the level cap is unknown of at the moment, it's only because I hadn't done everything. Like I've done a lot of stuff, but I hadn't done everything. And when I've heard that say there's a lot of stuff, there's a lot of stuff to do. So the main concept of Biomutant, what is the main story process? Well, the story is that the Tree of Life is dying. So in terms of the overall character arc, depending on how you want to go about it, depends on the overall ending process. For example, depending on how you want to tackle on the World Eaters, depending on how you want to stop the tribe wars, depending on the overall arc, which I will explain that towards the end of the video. But these three big events kind of layer on top of each other as to how the story will be displayed. Now, technically, I did the game as a good karma or light karma ending, so I don't know what the dark karma is like. I imagine it's sort of like something even more darker or something like that, but for the time being right now, I'm going to discuss my experience as like I was going through the light karma stasis. So probably within my second playthrough, I'll probably do a dark version of it and see how that experience progresses in the game. It's going to be interesting to see how that works. So let's talk about it step by step. So the first thing, you know, obviously you have the World Eaters. The World Eaters themselves, you have to stop them if you want to protect the Tree of Life. Now, technically, whenever the development of the game was, you can choose to let them live and thus destroy the Tree of Life. I don't know how that process works. I imagine you have to team up with another group of tribals and stuff in order to get an alternate direction made and stuff like that. So it'd be interesting to see what that alternate direction turns out. So again, that would be within New Game Plus that I will do, but there are certain steps that you have to take in order to take on the World Eaters. The first step is obviously acquiring your mech or mount, depending on the circumstances. For the first example, the World Eater, you get your first MKTON, and that MKTON can only be used in that area because it's very low in oxygen and very high in like carbonation. So in other words, there's no oxygen and it's hard to breathe in it. So you have to have a machine in order to walk through that mess. So whenever you get the necessary components, for example, you get your first crate in order to equip the machine that it needs in order to run. Then you have to have the ammunition in order to distract the creature that you'll be tackling on. And these ammunitions are used in order to, you know, prevent it from using like an ultimate move whenever the L2 trigger shows up and you use this infinite ammunition. So you go through this process of opening up crates, collecting this ammunition that you need in order to distract the giant World Eater. Then once you get what you need, you then tackle on the World Eater itself. And this happens 4 times. And while it does kind of feel repetitive, the way you tackle and fight each World Eater is drastically unique and drastically different every time. And I think it's, my personal opinion, I think it's done really well in my personal opinion. I think the demonstration of how to fight these World Eaters is different every time. And in a way, I would describe these as like the ultimate main bosses in this game, or the World Eaters itself, next to the final boss, but I won't talk about that because that's spoiler territory. But in terms of the World Eaters themselves, all of them, while trying to get to them, are almost the same, it feels like. The reality is, tackling on the World Eater itself is drastically different. And so, in my personal opinion, that part there was well done. The next thing is, of course, the tribe wars. Now, you can choose one of the 6 tribes that you can join with. I imagine you can join one of the other 4 tribes to join up, because at the time that you start off the game, you only know of the 2 tribes that are fighting each other. And you choose one or the other to choose, depending on who you choose, depends on the progression that they tackle on. And I chose the Sifu that wanted to try to destroy the World Eaters, and at the same time tried to conduct peace within the tribe leaders themselves. While this was an interesting concept, this was a very interesting concept in my personal opinion, and I liked it how it was displayed and stuff. The first time you tackle on these tribes and stuff like that is very unique. In my personal opinion, it works well for how it's displayed. But there was, unfortunately, an issue where it did feel a bit samey, sadly, you know, because you tackle on 3 forts, and then you tackle on the main fort. The first fort basically is a gauntlet of you fighting the army head-on and doing a number of things in order to progress through the fort until you get to the end. The second one involves, like, some kind of random stealth mission in which where you have to either destroy a hive nest in order to invest the area, or for that matter set out like a bomb or something to scare the enemy and stuff. And then the third one is where you challenge the fort leader, or not fort leader, but a second in command leader, and challenge them. The first one, I successfully was able to negotiate with him and he surrendered. The second time I decided to try it differently to see what would happen. And not only did it fail, but he also challenged me by throwing in his giant champion creature, which was quite interesting in my personal opinion. That was very interesting. And at the same time, by the time I got to the final fort of those 2 areas, and I'll explain that in a little bit, but in those 2 parts, it all ended the same, but I ended them differently. The first one, whenever I beaten it, I was able to successfully negotiate well to where we captured him, and I had a choice of either letting him free or putting him in prison. I chose to keep him in prison based on his overall decision of, like, letting the world rot. And I was like, that's probably not a good idea considering the fact that I'm wanting to save the world. So probably best just to put him behind bars for the time being. And then the second one negotiation went well on that one, and then I decided to let him loose. Now, the funny thing is that I don't know if this happens by default, or if it's because of what all I've done and how the decision I've made. But by the time I got the second Sifu fort took over, the other factions kind of surrendered. So I was able to make a decision of either conduct peace or continue the crusade. And since I was going on the path of light, I thought to myself, well, the less war, the better. So I chose to have them all join together. So I didn't have to worry about taking on the other 4 factions. But I thought that was interesting because I was like, that sounds like a pretty interesting concept, you know? It does actually feel like a war type thing where, you know, you challenge each individual tribe, and as you succeed in taking over one tribe over another, the other factions all of a sudden realize, oh shit, we have someone that's an actual threat. What should we do? Probably quit while we're still ahead. Good thinking, and they just surrender. And you can even choose to either let them surrender and join in peace, or you can choose to go after them in full force. So basically an overall crusade. So that's definitely something I want to try on my dark side playthrough and see how that turns out. But it's interesting because each faction that you go into, for example, the first Sifu that you work with, his overall secondary weapon is a boomerang, and that one's pretty interesting to use. It's not a big deal, but it's infinite ammunition, obviously. But the second Sifu, the one that you end up beating, he has a staff, and that's an actually fun weapon to use. And then, of course, you have the second Sifu, who has the hook weapon, which can be used as sort of like a, I suppose you can call it a devil arm move, where you throw it at an enemy and you pull yourself to the enemy in order to attack them, which is an interesting combat, I thought. And then, of course, the other Sifus, they have different method of weapons and stuff like that. And I imagine with these other different Sifus, they also have different method of combats. Like one has a bow, which that would have been interesting to try out, and then another one has shuriken stars. So again, each one has a different method of fighting, and I didn't really get a chance to go into the other force because I figured since I didn't have to fight them, I probably didn't have to worry about attaining their overarching weapon. Again, I'll try that on my dark playthrough just to see how that turns out. I'm going to go back and forth with this argument, but to a degree, that was pretty interesting. But unfortunately, again, much like how it felt like with World Eaters, it felt very repetitive and samey whenever you went through it a second time. You know, after the first World Eater, the second, third, and fourth kind of feels kind of repetitive, and you're like, okay, I know what I need to do, blah, 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 blah. And then whenever you go on to the actual World Eater itself, it's a different scenario, which kind of like, all of a sudden, you're kind of like, okay, this is, and then all of a sudden it's like, whoa, that's different. And then, of course, with the Sifu war battles and stuff like that, for some reason, even though the different Sifus themselves are uniquely different and you do get a different weapon, the way in which you tackle them and the way that you conquer them feels very much the same. So, in a way, it's not as unique as like Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild with its dungeons, or like how story-driven it is, like how in the Witcher 3 series, where its storytelling is so deep and depth. If nothing else, the dialogue feels kind of repetitive. In other words, while it's fun just to listen to the gibberish of the creatures talking and stuff like that, listening to the British guy over and over saying almost the exact same dialogue kinda sounds repetitive, sadly. I was actually afraid that that's what it was gonna be when I heard that he was gonna be talking, and I was like, oh, this could be a bad thing. I mean, it makes sense because the creatures are talking a different language, so you're not gonna understand them, but to have him talk after every sentence they say is like, oh dear gosh. I mean, you have the option to either mute it altogether, and you can even reduce the amount of speaking that the narrator has and everything like that, but at the same time, it's like, ooh, that's a bad thing right there. That's bad. That's not good. So with that being said, then you have the third main quest, which is that of the Ark, and the Ark is basically this alternate ship that basically takes you off the planet in order to venture on into other planets or something. It didn't really go into detail, but basically it was basically a plan B or a plan C of type thing in case beating the World Eaters did not save the Tree of Life. So in other words, it was an alternate path. So you choose other people to join with you on your ventures. These other seats are available. You can choose up to 4 random people. These don't contribute heavily as to how things go or contribute towards the storytelling from the way it looks, but ultimately I thought it was pretty interesting because while you wouldn't think nothing of it, as you go through the game, you interact with different people. These different people do a lot of things, and they're definitely unique in terms of their overall designs. And there's another subject that he mentions, the director, whenever he was interviewing with Angry Joe. There was another subject that he says when talking about the creature designs themselves. The other creatures, he said that he looks at them as like a Muppet whatnot. And it isn't until you start to explore and see all these different creatures, all their different looks, their different body features, their different looks and stuff like that, that all of a sudden a Muppet whatnot actually makes perfect sense to describe how these creatures look. Because while they seem kind of the same, all of them have unique features and they kind of stand out, basically. And so in my personal opinion, whenever I say the phrase, they literally are whatnots, it literally is. It literally is. And some of them look really, really good. Now, the biggest thing that was very important for me when looking at Biomutant was the combat. Is the combat good in Biomutant? And the answer is, oh yes it is. It is really good. It's really fun. There's so many different weapons that you can use, not just including the Sifu's weapons that you acquire, but your base weapons that you can use. Like, for example, you have single blades, you can dual blade them, you have broadsword, a hammer, you have a regular gun, you can dual gun them, you have a machine gun rifle, you have rifles, you have shotguns. I mean, there's a lot of stuff you can do. And not only are the different weapons that you have that you can use, you also have the fact that you can customize them. Yes, you can customize your weapons. And this is where I say the phrase, it's like Fallout. Because in the world of Fallout 3 and Fallout 4 especially, you can collect items, and you collect items in vast numbers and stuff like that. And you can use these items in whatever way you want to use. Say, for example, you acquire a busted up paint sprayer gun thing. You can use that as like a trigger type of thing. You can use like a tin can or something like that as a muzzler. There's all sorts of different components that you can use, and you can make the weapons however way you want to make them. So depending on the number stat on one particular item depends on the overall build that you're going to be building to make that weapon the best that it can possibly be. So in other words, when you're gathering items and gathering weapons and stuff like that, kind of experiment with all of them and see which one you are more prone to use more of, because more often than not you'll probably find a weapon that you like better. Like whenever I first started playing the game, I actually went with the sabotage, however that class is called, but he had dual wielding weapon techniques already pre-built, and with that, you can use 2 single blade swords, or single hand blade swords. And eventually I kind of tried out all the different types of weapons, and I ended up liking more of the broadsword, which is the 2-handed sword weapon. And I ended up using it more and more. But what's even more interesting is the fact that you can change the handle and use a different handle in order to increase the stats. You can also add small parts onto the weapon itself to where it gives it a little bit more damage output. So really, in terms of construction and build of the overall game, is so deep, but yet it's so simplistic too. Like, you look at the surface and you think, oh boy, this looks complicated, but the reality is, after like a few moments of dabbling with it, it's very easy to pick up. And I think that's the best part about it, is the fact they made it seem complex, but easy to master. And that is something that Fallout 4 failed when it did it. It made it too complex to a point where you lost interest in wanting to create anything. And that's unfortunate, you know, where it's like, you know, you want to have fun creating something. And instead you go so in depth with the details that you're so overwhelmed and you're like, what is half of this stuff? Why can't I figure out what I want? Because there's so much options to go with, you don't know what to do. And what's even more crazier is the fact that there's so many different key components that you would need in order to build stuff. All of a sudden, your playthrough will be missing a crucial key ingredient needed in order to make an item. So now you're trying to scavenge items and everything like that in order to create that item, but you never end up finding that resource you need. Where in Biomutant, it is separated into 5 simple categories. And it is so fascinating of how where Fallout failed to do, Biomutant did it better, in my personal opinion. In my personal opinion, it did it better. While technically you can't build your own fort, you can customize everything and anything possible. I mean, when you first get your first MKTON and you start opening crates and stuff, you can customize it however way you want to, with shoulder pads, chest armor, boots, a head. You can customize that however way you want to. With the guns, you can customize them. The weapons, you can customize them. It's unbelievable as to how much customization you can do. And it goes even beyond with your outfits. Your outfits actually can be equipped with additional pieces of junk as extra armor pieces. So in other words, whereas you got one outfit that has a set number armor, you can equip metal pieces onto that outfit, and it will increase the overall armor resistance. So in other words, it will have a lot more defensive power to protect itself. So I thought that was very interesting. So the build of the overall game, again, it makes it feel like it is so deep, but it's so simple to understand that all you gotta do is like collect a whole bunch of I want to say garbage, but technically it is, you know, when you think about it, it is trash, and equip it on yourself. It becomes armor, and it's so fascinating, and it works well with this game. So in my personal opinion, whereas Fallout 4 unfortunately failed trying to make it so complicated, in Biomutant it makes it simplistic to understand. And the cool thing is that whatever armor pieces you don't use, whatever outfits you don't use, whatever components for your weapons that you don't use, you can choose to either sell it or dismantle it and use those components in order to help create more and more weapons, because you need these in order to customize stuff. You need wood pieces, you need plastic pieces, you need e-waste, which is electronic waste. All this stuff, you need it in order to either increase the armor or the weapon's power, or to even remotely customize it and change it however way you want to. And in my personal opinion, this was done really well. I see now why the development took a while, because they were trying to figure out, okay, how can we make this good and fun for the player, but not too overly complicated to where they lose interest in doing this? Because that's what you gotta be careful with. You gotta be careful as to how much of a layer you put into the game, because you'll overpower the character to a point to where the player may lose interest in wanting to play the game. You may be making it too complicated to where they don't quite understand what's going on or what they need and stuff. And so in Biomutant's case, it's very simplistic to understand, and it's very in-depth in terms of how to build the overall gameplay experience. And to me, this is the fun part, is being able to custom create your weapons and use them in combat and improve as you continue venturing on. Because again, much like with Breath of the Wild, much like with The Witcher 3, as you're going through the entire game, you're attaining experience, you're attaining new items, and within each item and each experience you get, your overall build of the character grows, and in Biomutant that carries over. So in other words, while The Witcher 3 and Breath of the Wild raise the bar, Biomutant is a perfect blueprint for how to make an open world game. You don't need to have an overarching story. You don't need to have an overall depth in perspective or anything like that. You just need to understand what is needed in order to make an open world game. And that is to have beautiful landscapes, jaw-dropping sunscapes and everything like that, and a very well done battle mechanic with an interesting feature to use that in. And so in my personal opinion, with Biomutant, even though it didn't event customizations on weapons and stuff, it more or less improves it in my personal opinion. So the way I see it, it did really well in that area. And so with Biomutant, I want to give it a 4 out of 5. And I probably would still give it a 4 out of 5, but I feel like it would not be... I feel like it's as if I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't warn people about it. And that is the fact that Biomutant has a lot of bugs. It has a little bit of few issues that still needs tweaking. It's very unstable at its current state. However, though, it has recently had a patch, patch 1.4, and thankfully it's been available for consoles too, and not just for PC. So, in other words, the patch that came in kind of makes it a little bit better, and ever since that patch got released, I haven't had as many crashes. The game has actually crashed on me twice, and that is something that I can actually say for a fact that I've rarely experienced is actual game crashes. The only other game that I've ever experienced game crashes was that of Fallout 3, and that was from the DLC. Fallout 4, while it was kind of glitchy, but I've never experienced crashed. So, and I never played Fallout 76, for those of you that are asking, because, well, it was an online game, so why would I? Biomutant, unfortunately, did have a couple of crashes on me, but since the patch was released and stuff like that, I haven't had any major problems. I will say it's still a little bit unstable in some cases. Like, for example, after you fast travel, the game tends to lag a little bit and it has a hard time trying to catch up, but then like after 5 seconds at most, it tends to correct itself and get back into it. So it's kind of scary because then you're like, oh no, is this the day that it's gonna crash again? And it's like, okay, good, it didn't crash. So now it's not crashing as much, but I will say that it's still a little bit unstable. And I don't know, because again, I've only got it for PS4. But I say the PC is the more superior version, obviously so. That's not surprising, but I think the PC version is more superior in the fact that maybe it can handle it a little bit better, and that the PS4 isn't built to where it could handle it. I'm not sure. Again, if I had a PS5, I'd be able to test that and see how it plays. Maybe it might play a little bit better, maybe it might play a little bit worse, who's to say? But in terms of stability, it's a little bit hard to kind of adjust to. So it might be, just to let you know, if it feels a little janky, it is. But it does fix itself in some cases, and hopefully as the game stays out longer and more patches get added on to help increase the stability of the game will feel a little bit better and a little bit more improved. But then again, even Breath of the Wild and The Witcher 3 did have some complications in their gameplay, so it's no surprise. I mean, we're talking about an open world game, and when you've got that large of a landscape and that open, you're gonna have a little bit of a few bugs here and there. But in terms of game crashes, again, pre-patch, I did have a crash on me twice, but after the patch, I hadn't had any experience since then, although it's still a little bit janky in some cases. But I would still give it a 4 out of 5, despite those bugs, because to me, you've got the fact that you have an incredible character customization. You have the fact that you can equip any type of armor and create your character however way you want to. You can level up your character and select what key stat you want to level up and stuff. You can learn massive different abilities by either using PSIs, which is your overall karma readings and stuff, or you can use biotech in order to learn different bio-enhanced abilities, or increase your overall bio-enhanced resistance to where you are more immune to like poison, radiation, heat, or frost for that matter. So the way I see it, depending on how you want to go building the character, it's overarching and it has a lot of depth to it. And then the weapon customizations are very in-depth as well. So the way I see it, you're getting a really good built game, really, when you think about it. Is it a little bit rough around the edges. It can be, but you are getting an experience. You're getting a very good open world, furry Fallout game. And that's hard to believe it, but it's true. That is, if I had to make it as simplistic as I possibly could, it is the furry version of Fallout. A better version, to say the least. So this was really good. I will say that if I had to make one small complaint, is that you don't really have a home base. And I would like it if you could. I would like it if you could actually have a home base. And I didn't really see any. I mean, there's plenty of, like, balloon ships that you can hop on with, like, workbenches and stuff. But technically in the advertisement, you could actually pilot one for your own. And I didn't really get to encounter one any in the entire game. I don't know if it's somewhere else. Again, I hadn't done everything in the game. I'd beaten the main story and stuff like that. But to me, Biomutant was well worth the wait. And to me, I had some really good times with it. So I would definitely give it a 4 out of 5. So anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching. And I shall see you in the next video. This is BlackCross signing off. Catch you guys later. Also, too, I know you guys are probably looking behind me and realize, where's his cloud wall scroll? Well, I had to take it down because the Biomutant fabric poster, I decided to hang it up there. So, you know, until later on, that's going to be a blank screen at the moment. But, yeah, I wanted to hang my Biomutant poster up there. So, anyway, see you in the next video.